Good morning. There is hope in Algiers this morning, hope that a 9-day hijacking odyssey may be over soon. A Kuwait Airlines jumbo jet is sitting on the tarmac at the airport in Algiers. 32 hostages are still on board. The plane arrived from Cyprus in the early morning. It sat in the dark for about 4 hours. Then, at dawn, a sign that a deal may be in the works. A negotiator boarded the jet and talked to the hijackers for 48 minutes. The Algerian Interior Minister later told reporters that the hostages were in good health and spirits. 12 hostages were freed before the plane left Cyprus. They talked about their experience with reporters. One of the captives saying that 2 of the hijackers boarded the jumbo jet in the Iranian city of Mashhad. That was the first stop for the commandeered plane. Anthony Mason has more on the released hostages from Larnaca, Cyprus.
After their first good night's sleep in 8 days, the 12 released hostages were in good condition, according to doctors.
They were very scared, and you could see in their eyes that behind their small smile, there was some long-standing fear behind that.
The 12 passengers, Kuwaitis, Egyptians, and Jordanians, said this morning that they didn't know they were in Cyprus until they got off the plane. The execution of 2 fellow passengers, they said, had also been kept secret.
We know here in the hospital that somebody shot there in the plane.
No, you were on plane when they shot.
We didn't hear anything. We don't know. We shocked when we reached here. Somebody said for us that...
If we in the airplane, we don't know.
Over the past 4 days in Larnaca, the Cypriot government had said it would not refuel the plane unless all the passengers were released. Last night, Cypriot officials insisted they had not backed down.
We let the plane go because we received such assurances that the rest of the passengers will be released in Algiers.
For the 12 left behind, at least, an 8-day ordeal is over.
And we thank God we are going back again home.
Anthony Mason, CBS News, Cyprus.
South African officials are trying to determine what caused a chartered plane to crash about 150 miles southwest of Johannesburg on Tuesday. All 23 people on board the DC-3 died in the crash. The plane was carrying South Africa's top jockeys and trainers en route to Johannesburg. The pilot reported a fire on board, and soon afterwards the plane went down in flames. It exploded on impact, scattering wreckage over a wide area. Rescue workers say there is no hope of finding any survivors. The federal government has announced plans to sell Air Canada to the public. It will be the largest privatization plan in Canadian history. Initially, 45% of Air Canada shares will be offered to the public. Eventually, the entire airline will be sold. But the plan must first be approved by Parliament, and it could take years before the sale is complete. The plan to sell Air Canada drew immediate criticism from the opposition. One Liberal MP says taxpayers already own the airline and shouldn't have to buy it again. The leaders of the opposition, meanwhile, were quick to remind the Prime Minister of what he said in 1985.
It is not up for sale. There may be some persuasive arguments in the case of Air Canada that some people can make in regard to the disposition of equity. I'll take a look at it. But Canada needs national airlines.
Liberal leader John Turner says Mulroney has now broken that promise. And NDP leader Ed Broadbent says the privatization plan amounts to a sellout. But Mulroney says the new plan doesn't contradict what he said 3 years ago because he never ruled out the possibility of selling minority shares. Some of the Turkish refugee claimants who marched from Montreal to Ottawa are now going to march back to Montreal again. They're doing so because they ran into a stone wall on Parliament Hill. They went there to ask the federal government to allow them to stay in Canada. They were looking for compassion, but they found very little. In a meeting with representatives of the group, Immigration Minister Barbara McDougall said there could be no exceptions to the law. That means the Turks have to go back to Turkey and apply for immigrant status from there. In all, about 2,000 Turks in Canada have been refused refugee status. Quebec Premier Robert Bourassa takes his western tour to Saskatchewan today. The issue of language rights is expected to be on the agenda, as it was in Alberta yesterday. Dave Wren reports.
There is only one official language in Alberta, and it's not French.
Bonjour, comment allez-vous?
But Quebec Premier Robert Bourassa was branded a traitor by Alberta's 60,000 francophones, even before he sat down for talks with Premier Getty.
With a friend like Mr. Bourassa, who needs enemies?
At issue is a bill to be introduced in the Alberta legislature this spring in compliance with the same Supreme Court ruling that led to the introduction of Saskatchewan's Bill C2.
Basically, he's saying to Alberta and Saskatchewan, you can do basically what you want with the Francophone minorities in those provinces, but when I do what I want with the Anglophone minority in Quebec, you guys had better keep quiet.
Even if that's true, the two premiers aren't about to admit it. But Getty had praise for Saskatchewan's legislation recognizing French as an official language, and Bourassa expects Alberta to adequately safeguard the rights of its French-speaking minority.
I trust that Mr. Getty will take the most appropriate decision.
Dave Rinn, CTV News, Edmonton.
And finally this morning, California has a new celebrity mayor. Sonny Bono has been elected mayor of Palm Springs. He easily beat out 6 other candidates, winning 62% of the vote. Bono rose to fame singing "I've Got You, Babe" with his former wife, Cher. California's other celebrity mayor, Clint Eastwood, ended his 2-year term in Carmel yesterday. Eastwood did not run for a second term, saying he wants to spend more time with his family. That's the news, 7.5 minutes after the hour. Now here's Norm.
It'll be Calgary against Edmonton, next round of the NHL playoffs. Here's Dan with more detail.
Well, Norm, along with the St. Louis Blues, those two teams get to relax a little bit and wait for the next round, but you have to figure that the defending champions and the NHL's top team this season are just going to have a war when they finally have at it next week. Northlands Coliseum, the Oilers jumped all over the Winnipeg Jets, building a 5-0 lead. Mark Messier pots his second there to make it 4-0. He has a 4-point night, as does Jari Kurri. He scores a pair, circles the net to make it 6-2, beating Daniel Bertium. This series is all over. In Calgary, Håkan Loob gives the Flames a 4-2 lead on the LA Kings with a blast that beats Glenn Healy. He has a pair on the night. The eventual winner scored early in the third by Tim Hunter. This one is a 6-4 count and gets set for the Battle of Alberta. Now, a former Flame, young Brett Hall, wearing number 16 for the St. Louis Blues, continues to score. That makes it 3-1. Blues lead Chicago. It's tied in the third when he guns the winner, his third game winner of the series. 5-3 final, the Hawks are finished. In Detroit, the Maple Leafs stave off elimination. Ed Olchuk snaps in his second of the game. The Leafs are ahead, but they need overtime to win the hockey game. Salming to Olchuk. He gets the hat trick, beating Greg Stephan. 6-5 the final. These two go back to Toronto. Now, after being down in their series 3-0, the Hartford Whalers have bounced back with 2 straight wins over the Canadiens. That's Kevin Dineen getting it started last night at the Forum. And Kerry Wilson makes it 2-0. This one would end 3-1, and this series will go back to Hartford with the Canadiens in front. Bruins shorthanded, great effort by Rick Middleton. He puts it the Bruins 2-0 in front of Buffalo. Now they only have a 1-goal lead in the third period when Middleton caps a really nice play for the eventual winner. 5-4 Boston. They are in Buffalo for Game 6 tomorrow. In Landover, the Capitals win for the first time ever when faced by elimination in a playoff series. They were 0-7 until last night. They finally get by the Flyers. Bengt Gustafsson gets the scoring started. Bobby Gould beats Ron Hextall with Washington a man short. 4-2 Capitals. They go to the Spectrum next. The Devils, meanwhile, are shorthanded on Long Island when Pat Conacher puts New Jersey ahead of the Isles. And Aaron Broughton guns a long one to make it 4-2 Devils, who will get the next one at home. And for all those teams still at it, they will renew acquaintances tomorrow night, Game 6 in every series. Canada is still tied atop the standings at the Men's World Curling Championships with Norway. Pat Ryan won twice yesterday, beat Scotland 6-2 and Denmark 8-4, and will meet Norway today along with West Germany. News not so good today for Canada's baseball teams. The Expos were shut out by Ron Darling and the Mets 3-0. Well, the Yankees took revenge for that big loss just 2 days ago. They drubbed the Blue Jays 12-3 on the day that Cal Ripken was fired as manager in Baltimore and replaced by Frank Robinson. That's our look at sports.
The Deputy Prime Minister took Canadians and the opposition by surprise with the announcement that Air Canada will be sold to the private sector. Don Mazankowski joins us now in Ottawa. Good morning, Mr. Mazankowski.
Good morning, Nancy.
A lot of people remember what the Prime Minister said in 1985, Air Canada is not for sale. Why the about-face?
Well, I would hope that they would remember the whole statement because Mr. Mulroney said at that time there may be some persuasive arguments for selling off some equity, and we will take a look at it. And we've taken a look at it over 3 years and came up with the conclusion that it's the most appropriate thing to, at this time, to move towards the privatization of Air Canada. There have been a lot of changes in the profile of the airline industry during that period of time. Regulatory reform, a new National Transportation Act, the whole airline industry has changed dramatically. At that time, we had one major national air carrier, namely Air Canada. Today, we have 3. So, taking all those things into consideration, it was important to make this move at this time.
You have always been known to be a big booster of privatization. If you had your way, Mr. Mazankowski, would you be selling off all of Air Canada if you could?
Well, basically, we want to do it in a step-by-step process, and what we did do yesterday was announce a policy, a specific policy, and to issue some 45% of Treasury shares to put on the market, and to move towards that process. We want to concentrate on the small shareholder. We want to ensure that employees have a good opportunity to invest in their airline. And we want Canadians right across the country, from coast to coast, to have the opportunity to take a direct equity position in the airline. This is not new. It happens to many air carriers in the world. KLM, Lufthansa, airlines like that are partially owned by the government, partially owned by the private sector. The legislation will call for the eventual full privatization. Will give that latitude, but it's too early to determine just what follow-up there might be. But for the present, 45% of the Treasury shares would be issued for and would be available to the Canadian public.
How soon would Canadians see the 45% on the market?
Well, as soon as we can get legislation through, and we plan to proceed very quickly.
How soon are you going to introduce legislation?
As soon as we can get the legislation drafted, and I would say it would be a matter of weeks.
Once that's done, of course, we all know that you have a full parliamentary plate on hand. What kind of priority are you going to be giving so that you can get this legislation through, say, in a matter of months before the summer break?
It will be given very top priority, Nancy.
So is your deadline to have the legislation through by summer?
Well, as you know, it's very difficult to predict the passage of legislation in the House of Commons or particularly through the Senate, but we will intend to proceed very quickly because it's in the interest of the airline. We're not doing this for ideological reasons. I think it has been well established that the management, the board of directors, and a good percentage of Air Canada employees believe that this is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for Air Canada, to give it the flexibility, the ability to raise its capital, to renew its fleet, and to do those kinds of investments that is required, and the flexibility to compete in a market-oriented environment. This will secure the future of Air Canada, and that is why employees are so excited about it.
As you say, Mr. Mazankowski, there's no way of telling how the Senate's going to respond to this. The kind of priority that you're trying to give this, would you be inclined to recommend that if the Senate stalls on this piece of legislation, for you that would be the last straw, let's call an election on this one?
Well, I wouldn't want to speculate on that. I would think that, I would hope that the Senate would not be irresponsible or reckless on this issue, and I would hope that members of Parliament opposite wouldn't. If they want to play politics, put politics ahead of the future of Air Canada, then they can very well do that. But I think that for them to stall or try to filibuster an important measure like this would certainly do irreparable damage to the airline, and I would hope that they would take on a greater sense of responsibility in this issue.
How do you think the shares would sell? Do you think they'll sell like hotcakes, or do you think there's a fairly big marketing strategy ahead, too?
Well, I think they will. What we want to do is to ensure that the marketing strategy is such that there will be broad participation in this issue, and that there will be accessibility, and we want to ensure that the information that will be required for each individual shareholder to invest in the airline, that they will have that information. We want to make it as easy as we possibly can. This is a good opportunity to buy for Canadians, to buy into a national airline that is a national symbol, a very important transportation institution in Canada. And I think that there's a lot of excitement. I'm pleased by the reaction of the employees, and I travel the airlines a lot, and I know that in talking to individual employees of Air Canada, there really has been a sense of expectation, and I know today that there's a sense of excitement about that prospect.
Well, you surprised us, Mr. Mazankowski, by moving so quickly on Air Canada. Are you going to be surprising us again soon, say, with Petro-Canada? What have you got in mind for Petro-Canada?
Well, you know, Nancy, I move in a slow and thoughtful manner, and we take these things one step at a time.
Well, are you telling us, though, you can't rule out a few surprises in the next few weeks?
Well, Nancy, we've privatized some 13 Crown corporations since we've been in office, and
more to come, right?
But this one is the big one, and there are others that are candidates that we're looking at, and as I said, we'll take it one step at a time.
Thanks for joining us this morning, Mr.
My
Mazankowski.
pleasure indeed.
It's 16 past the hour. Here's Norm.
More people than ever want to go to university this fall, and more people than ever will be turned away. We'll have that story when we come back.